This is BBC One Wales. Very good afternoon to you. Now the Sunday lunchtime news with Ben Brown.
Hello, good afternoon. Prince Charles has addressed the summit of the G20 group of the largest economies, urging governments across the world to do more to tackle global warming. He described the UN Climate Change Conference in Glasgow, which starts today, as the last chance saloon for humanity to act to prevent catastrophic warming. He also urged political leaders to work with the private sector to increase investment in clean technologies. Our diplomatic correspondent James Landale reports now from Rome.
For world leaders at the G20 summit, a brief Roman holiday this morning, gathering at the famous Trevi fountains for the cameras, a chance to chat away from their advisors. A huge burden still lies on these shoulders, for it's the job of Boris Johnson and his Italian counterpart to persuade these leaders to do more to reduce global warming. Collectively, their economies produce 80% of the world's carbon emissions, and some are reluctant to reduce their reliance on fossil fuels. Was the Prime Minister wishing for luck as he threw his coin into the fountain? Then, enter stage left, an ally. The Prince of Wales had been invited by the Italian Prime Minister to address the world leaders, and he did not hold back. He told them they had an overwhelming responsibility to a generation yet unborn, and must harness the private sector to save the world.
Ladies and gentlemen, COP26 begins in Glasgow tomorrow. Quite literally, it is the last chance saloon. We must now translate fine words into still finer actions. And as the enormity of the climate challenge dominates people's conversations, and as the future of humanity and nature herself are at stake, it is surely time to set aside our differences and grasp this unique opportunity to launch a substantial green recovery by putting the global economy on a confident, sustainable trajectory and thus save our planet.
Alongside such heady stuff came more mundane politics. The Prime Minister and President Macron spending 25 minutes discussing their dispute over fishing rights, agreeing, according to French officials, to work on practical measures to achieve a de-escalation of the row. But the focus of this summit remains the climate crisis. Reports suggest the leaders will promise to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. What matters is whether they'll do enough to achieve it. And Ben, the sticking point seems to be coal. Countries that produce a lot of the stuff and consume a lot of it are seemingly reluctant to sign up to firm, tough new commitments to reduce their global warming. And I think that is an issue and a decision that's going to be delayed until Glasgow. It's not going to be decided here in Rome. And amid all of that, the fishing row with France continues. As I said in the report after the meeting between Mr. Johnson and Mr. Macron this morning, the French said they had agreed practical measures to de-escalate. Well, Downing Street, I have to say, were rather nonplussed by this. They were unable to tell us what those practical measures were. They said it is up to France to de-escalate from the threats that they are making. And they were unable to set out precisely what they were going to do. They said the British position had not changed. In the official readout, they made it very clear. They said Mr. Johnson had told Mr. Macron of his deep concerns at the rhetoric emanating from the French side in recent days. So there's talk of de-escalation here, but not much sign of it.
All right, James, thank you very much. James Landale there, our diplomatic correspondent in Rome. So, as we've heard, world leaders will begin arriving in Glasgow later today for the COP26 Climate Change Conference. Delegates from almost 200 countries are gathering for 2 weeks of talks aimed at reaching an agreement on how to cut emissions. Its President Alok Sharma said today that hitting the 1.5-degree global warming target will be very tough and that the world needs to come together to achieve it. Alexandra Mackenzie reports now from Glasgow.
Alok Sharma, elect President of the 26th session.
The global summit is finally underway. Glasgow is hosting world leaders and thousands of delegates for these crucial climate change talks.
The president of COP26 told Andrew Marr that keeping global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius would be challenging.
Is that if we look at all the commitments that have been made, and I said we're heading towards 2 degrees, how is it that over this next decade, indeed over the next few years, we close that gap so that we get closer to 1.5? And that's something that I'm going to have to try and build consensus on at this COP.
The Swedish teenager Greta Thunberg arrived in Glasgow by train last night, mobbed by fellow activists. She had voiced concern that COP26 would not lead to significant changes, but said it's not too late to do what we can.
If we switched our focus from trying to create loopholes and excuses to not take action, which is very much the case now, no matter how you see it, if we switch from that focus to actually trying to combat climate change in a way that would actually solve it, taking into account the whole perspective, then I think that we could achieve massive changes.
The Scottish weather outside is dull and dreich, and security is tight. Inside, the stakes are high as talks begin on how to cut carbon emissions by 2030. In Edinburgh this morning, activists gathered to have their voices heard. They want more done to tackle climate change here in Scotland and around the world. Alexandra Mackenzie, BBC News, Glasgow.
Police say that 3 people have died and 1 is in a critical condition in hospital after an incident on the River Cleddau in West Wales. Emergency services were called yesterday after a group of paddleboarders got into trouble in severe weather. 5 were rescued from the water uninjured. A full investigation is now underway. Voting has just ended in Japan's parliamentary election, which has been an early test for the Prime Minister Fumio Kishida. Exit polls suggest the governing Liberal Democratic Party, which has been in power since 2012, will retain its overall majority but will lose seats. Now, as pupils return after the half-term break, health teams are to visit 800 schools across England to offer those aged between 12 and 15 a coronavirus vaccine. Young people are also being encouraged to take a COVID test before returning to classes, as Simon Jones now reports.
You lot are braver than most of the grown-ups.
When pupils returning to school this week are asked, what did you do in the half-term break? Some will be able to say, I got my jab. Special sessions have been put on for 12 to 15-year-olds at vaccination centres like this one in Kent. And now the plan is to allow more pupils to get a jab at school, with teams going into hundreds of schools in England this week.
I might be carrying it and I don't even know.
Yeah,
and if he catches it, then...
Because I'm quite old, I'm an old dad, so I'm in my 60s, and obviously he worries a bit about that.
We've had deaths in the family, so we thought maybe, I know she's young, but, it's better to be safe.
I wanted to get it done. I want all the things to be back normal again.
Parents of pupils who haven't yet had the jab are being encouraged to go online and read about the programme to allow them to make an informed choice. More than 600,000 young people have been vaccinated since the rollout was extended to include 12 to 15-year-olds at the end of September. Another 140,000 children have their jabs booked over the next few weeks, according to NHS England. The Office for National Statistics says the percentage of people testing positive remains highest amongst children in school years 7 to 11, estimated at just over 9%. Pupils are also being urged to take a lateral flow test before returning to school to minimise disruption to lessons. The aim, to keep as many children safely in the classroom as possible. Simon Jones, BBC News.
And that's it from me. You can see more on all of today's stories on the BBC News channel and continuing coverage with the very latest from the COP26 Climate Change Summit in Glasgow. The next news on BBC One is at 5 o'clock. Goodbye from me.